pickup in the unemployment rate would completely change the ethos of Washington, Wall Street, all mainstream media. In the blink of an eye, we went from the booming, growing economy, we're so happy, inflation's gone, things are fantastic, to suddenly, oh no, the recession is probably already here, the world's falling apart, what are we going to do? Sell, sell, sell. To say the least, it's an overreaction. For one thing, the data is a month old, which goes without saying. It's not as if the recession arrived on Friday. The data was from the month earlier. The other thing to observe about this is that it wasn't particularly bad relative to what it's been in the past. The decay in the jobs market has been very overwhelmingly obvious to me and many others for at least 2 years, if not going back. We never really recovered out of the lockdown period. We never recovered the worker participation ratios or labor participation rates. They're still below 2019 levels. So, and we can take apart the jobs data. There's a growing divergence between household survey and business payrolls, strongly suggesting double counting in the establishment survey. That gap never previously even existed. And then suddenly in the last 4 years, it appeared, and it's widening, it gets wider to the point that one is plunging and the other is rising. That happened for several months over the course of the last 8 months. Then you have the revisions. So every month, the jobs data will come out and say, oh, 220,000 jobs. And the 190,000 jobs from last month is now revised down. There was really only 90,000 jobs. Wait, where do those jobs go? It began to look for a while like all the jobs would be pushed a month forward and taken out of the previous month and put into the new month. So there's a lot of illusions in this data all along, to the point that I had lost interest in the headline numbers, so-called unemployment, because it doesn't include discouraged workers. It doesn't account for the people who just dropped out, the people who've just decided to do something other than work. The unemployment data only counts the people who are desperately looking for jobs and can't find one, and that ended up being relatively low. But it doesn't mean that much. That doesn't mean a healthy jobs market. In other words, the jobs market has not been healthy for a very long time. But there was something that broke the psychology of denial that happened on Friday morning. It has something to do with Wall Street and mainstream media's attachment to this headline unemployment number. So when that broke, then everything else fell down. And suddenly somebody screamed, there's an elephant in the room, and everybody started running around like mad.
Yeah. Why don't you lay out for me a little more about, why these numbers could be so different? Because you're looking at a range of different types of data.
Yeah.
And I know because you've been covering this issue.
Listen, I can't stop writing about it because I've just become obsessed with it. And I'll tell you, it's because when you're trained in economics, you're trained to trust the data. Economists trust CPI and GDP and jobs numbers the way epidemiologists believe in vaccines. I mean, it's really part of your profession. If the economists have not assembled these indexes correctly and they're not to be trusted, then what can you trust? It's like a professional doctrine. And I never doubted it, and you're taught this over and over and over, to believe in these numbers and believe in national income accounting, believe in GDP, believe in all these things. And so in the last 4 years, I've begun to examine the things much more closely with a real curious eye. A lot of times you don't see something unless you're somehow motivated to see it. And I began taking these numbers apart a lot more in recent years. In fact, to the point of absurd obsessions, actually. And what I've realized is that I think they've always been approximations, but I feel as if in the last several years, last 4, they've become highly politicized and really mixed up ever since the lockdowns kind of blew up everything, the labor numbers, the output numbers, the trade data, everything kind of fell apart, and it just took a long time to get back to the point where you're collecting data more accurately. And during that period, there's a lot of loss of trust. I mean, one thing that's happened is a lot fewer businesses pick up the phone when the survey takers want to know how many people they've hired. They're just not interested in answers. So you've got far fewer answers than you used to have, and less accurate data collection. And we can go through each of these numbers. But I just want to quickly go back to this unemployment point, because we do this thing called business cycles. We believe, and we've always believed for at least a century, that economic activity goes in these kind of up and down motions. There's a trade cycle. There's a recovery, maybe a little bit of irrational exuberance, a correction to that, a bit of a sinking point, and then it recovers again. And economists have believed this, and it's been more or less true for 100 years. And so it becomes really important to date the business cycle. When did the recovery begin? When did the recession begin? How long did the recession last? How big a recovery did we have, and how long did it last, and how much did we grow? These are interesting questions. Well, why do we ask them? Well, it has something to do with our curiosity for, is the world outside of my own personal experience actually functioning? What kind of world do I live in? Are we getting richer? Are we getting poorer? You know, what's happening to the status of others? What is our country doing? Are we growing? Are we shrinking? We want answers to these questions. The only way we really get answers to those questions is by assembling data. I mean, we pretend to do science, right? And we shove it into these machines and wait for the ticker tape to come out, and it has a number on it. We declare it recovery, recession, growth, shrinkage, you know, whatever the thing is. And we put a label on it and tell that, here's where we are. We're in recession. We're in recovery. But we have to have some standards to determine this. So traditionally, the recession, and probably arbitrarily, but traditionally the recession has been declared when there's been 2 successive quarters of declining real GDP. Okay, so the GDP numbers measure output. Output. There's a lot of things in that term, output. Let's say you can measure it. Let's measure it. Real output means you have to adjust that output by inflation. So that if your output numbers are just measuring increases in prices, that's no good. So now you've got another problem, because you need an accurate measure of inflation too. So you get an accurate measure of output and an accurate measure of inflation, shoved together, out comes your real GDP. Now you can look at 2 successive quarters, 3 months, and then another 3 months, and if both those are 0 or negative, you say, now we're in recession. All right? That's the rule. We made it up. We made up a lot of this story, but it's a rule. And that's what we've always believed in. Well, we were presented with a serious problem in the first and second quarter of 2022, because we had 2 successive quarters of declining GDP. But nobody wanted there to be a recession. So, like, we can't have a recession right now. That's a terrible idea. This is terrible timing. So instead, here's, there's no recession. Well, how do we know there's no recession? There's always been a footnote here, and the footnote is that the labor markets have to be unhealthy. There has to be rising unemployment. Granted, if you had 2 successive quarters of declining real GDP and rising unemployment, then it would be a recession. Okay, that was the excuse in quarters 1 and 2. And guys like me were going, folks, we've had 2 successive quarters of declining real GDP. That is a recession. You can't just come along and say, that's not a recession. Oh, sure we can. Because every previous recession has been associated with higher unemployment. What are you going to do about that? Oh, good point. Good point, I guess. Okay, so we got through that. And, okay, well, I thought it felt like a recession to me. I think it was a recession, but nobody agrees with me. I'll just live with it. Okay, that sustained itself until Friday. And now we got a problem. So we've got an uptick, according to the so-called SOM rule, whatever, which is a 50 basis points increase in unemployment rate over the previous year-over-year statistics. So we crossed that point in the data, and the Sahm rule is that that's a recession. So now you've got an additional problem. So it broke the market psychology. I guess my point is nothing really changed except the perceptions. So suddenly, everybody was suddenly on Friday screaming recession.
Well, the thing is that you've been asking questions about these unemployment numbers for some time.
Yeah. I have that. The jobs numbers, I think, have been really sketchy, and especially because of the two surveys, the payroll survey and the household survey. So if the bakery across the street fires a full-time employee and hires 2 part-timers, and the phone rings, how many jobs have you created? Have you created any jobs this month? Yeah, we used to have 1 employee and never got 2. Oh, well, that's great. Okay. The household across the street, they call it the household. How's everything going? Well, I used to have a full-time job. Now I've got 2 jobs, but I think that just counts as 1 job. So that's where the divergence comes. Whether you're talking to the households, they're going to be reporting how many people are working in the household. If you call it the businesses, they're going to report how many people they've employed. So when the multiple job holders start massively increasing, starting 4 years ago after the lockdowns, after the opening came alive, and there's a number of reasons for this, because hospitality was hurt so much during the lockdowns, they started hiring ever more and more part-timers. So now we've got the highest rate of multiple jobs holders we've ever seen. Some people are holding 2 full-time jobs, which is extremely strange. I told a story the other day in an Epoch article that I was in line at the grocery store, and you should never talk to people online. You shouldn't comment on other people's groceries. It's sort of rude. But this nice lady had 2 clothes hampers, collapsible clothes hampers, and I'm a bit of a talker, right? I said, "Hey, those are some pretty nice clothes hampers you got there." Shut up, Parker. I said, "What? I'm just curious. What drew you to those clothes hampers, and why did you buy 2?" She goes, I don't know anything about these things. I'm just shopping here for Instacart. I said, so you're not actually buying for yourself? You're buying for somebody else? Yeah. They just sit at home and click buttons, and I push carts around, fill it up, and deliver it to them. Oh, that's really interesting. Not having done this much myself, I was very curious about this. Well, the next time I went back to the store, I thought, how many other people here are doing this? And it turned out I bumped into a bunch of it. I said, you shop for yourself or you shop for Instacart? I work for Instacart. So a store full of people shopping for other people. And then I began to ask their stories. University educated, full-time job of the day, working the nights and weekends for Instacart. And you have to ask yourself, is this normal? You've got a university degree, and you've got a full-time job, but you're filling your nights and weekends. I'm all for work. I mean, you've got a work ethic, that's fantastic. That's great, hustling for money. But it doesn't seem quite right. Something seems a little odd. That a full-time salary with a university education is not enough to pay your bills. You can't pay your groceries and your mortgage and your car payment. So you have to get a second and a third job? Anyway, that's what's going on in this country. We spent way too much time in the jobs markets because there's other things wrong with the data. And I would like to turn, if we can, turn some attention over to this inflation number, which ends up being really important.
So Jeffrey, we're going to take a quick break right now, and we'll be right back.